With Frontiers receiving 3 waves of free DLC throughout the year, I figure this would make for a nice opportunity to reflect on how the series has handled post-launch support when at its best. That's right, I'm returning to Sonic Lost World once more. Despite its somewhat contentious nature, I consistently find this title to be one of the most overlooked in the series, and one that leaves me fascinated by its core design and its hidden strengths underneath. It was rewarding to share my full experience with a long-form review which was published on my channel last September. However, I intentionally ignored one of Lost World's diversions in that review, which brings us to today's little encore. In this brief video essay, I will examine what makes each of Sonic Lost World's DLC levels so extraordinary, before concluding with a wider discussion on what this represents in a greater context. If you haven't seen my in-depth review of Sonic Lost World, it is recommended that you give that a viewing first, as that video contains an analysis of the entire experience from a personal viewpoint. I hope you'll enjoy this bonus feature as well. First and foremost, why was DLC for this game created in the first place? Well, Lost World was a key component of a 3-game partnership between Sega and Nintendo that was signed into contract in 2013. The ramifications of this are a topic pivotal to the state of the franchise even today, but that is a different discussion entirely. What bears emphasis is this: Sega's close partnership with Nintendo allowed for special collaborations, and while not much really came from this, it was announced that Sonic Lost World would be receiving 2 DLC levels featuring worlds from popular Nintendo franchises, which I recall as an extremely exciting idea at the time. And if that wasn't enough, the levels were going to be free to download at no cost to the consumer. With literally nothing to lose, you can enjoy a couple of extra levels that feature Sonic crossing over with Nintendo IPs. To some, I could probably stop there. This is certainly a rare sight in the industry, and the fact that these levels were created for Lost World is kinda extraordinary in itself. But I hope you'll humor me as I analyze these more specifically, because the level of care that went into each of these is often overlooked, and we'll soon discover what is truly special about the DLC levels created for Sonic Lost World. Sega had one opportunity to capitalize on this special offer from the monolith they were collaborating with. What did they choose to do? Well, you can't discuss the Nintendo crossover levels without covering the in-house celebration first. Thankfully, it's more than worthwhile as a starting point. Sega actually kicked off the DLC bonanza with their own history. One of their long-dormant franchises receives a celebratory return. Nights into Dreams remains a classic from the early days of 3D graphics, providing a colorful, inventive world inspired by dreams, nightmares, and so much more. While capturing the sensation of flying was the main focus of that game, the worlds created for it surpassed the impressions gameplay had at the time, with Knight's iconography finding itself everywhere in Sega-related products. This is because Knights is actually a Sonic Team production. The same team behind many Sonic titles created this entirely separate franchise. There is much to be enjoyed from the marriage of iconography between both series, and that makes Nightmare Zone so endearing, despite the, daunting title, of course. The level tells a short story entirely through gameplay, opening with Sonic auto-running in Windy Hill. The player can chain homing attacks into the blue chips Knights collects in the original game, and the yellow rings Knights flies through even make an appearance. Interacting with these elements is neat, though it's not long before the creator of all nightmares, Wiseman, appears. Color is zapped from the lost hex, and the nightmare equivalent to Knights, Riala, flies ahead. You give chase only to be transported to a nightmare realm. While I wish a little more emphasis was placed on Riala, who can be rather easy to miss, this is a solid introduction of what's to come. The Nightmare Realm acts as a host for remixed boss fights that utilize the base mechanics of Zeddy encounters throughout Lost World, though with slight twists that feel directly inspired by the bosses they are paired up with. The Deadly Six employ these iconic bosses from the original Knights, and with the combination of wacky visual assets floating about with the tag-teaming villains of Sega's history, really pull a lot of weight in justifying this crossover. I mean, seriously, I emphasized how important it was to the vision of Lost World that levels and environments felt off-kilter, strange, and foreign. The Nightmare Realm couldn't have been a better fit for Sonic to explore in this spherical, Mario Galaxy-esque design. The first boss encounter is focused on Puffy, who takes the place of Zaz's Moon Mech from the usual encounter. Besides dropping shiny gems as an attack, it's essentially the same fight as before, just with more charm. Her stage presence persists, strange vocal grunts take focus in the audio design, and the overall interaction is a pretty irreverent tone as a result. Not a poor choice, considering the objective is not just to throw a bunch of Knights iconography at the player, but to make the player feel overwhelmed and surprised. This continues into Zomom's remixed fight, which is essentially a simplistic skydiving minigame. One of Wiseman's hands acts as a platform for Sonic to chase while avoiding energy orbs. I wish this section demanded much more from the player, because it's essentially as mindless as the Desert Ruins version, if not more so. The encounter with Zeke is much better, leading him towards the Pool of Darkness in the same vein as his rolling fruit from Tropical Coast. I absolutely adore the inclusion of Gulpo. There's something weirdly cute about seeing Zeke riding this oversized fish. Again, the charm is just through the roof with this crossover. There may not be much mechanically unique to a boss rush mode that is largely bolstered by presentation, but that's just it. The sheer level of detail that went into recreating the world of Knights is staggering, and only serves to bolster the vision behind Sonic Lost World. As color is restored to the world, this becomes more evident. The bright blue chips and cheerful atmosphere juxtapose well with the madness that Sonic escaped from. It becomes clear just how effective this level is for obtaining rings, and therefore, more lives. The freedom to engage with the blue chips and flying rings are given proper time to breathe here, with smooth animations that give Sonic a floaty feel, akin to Knights. Even the gameplay improves in the second visit to the Nightmare Realm, beginning with Xena. In Lost World, her second fight in Frozen Factory Zone 4 was one of the worst encounters in the game, but they actually managed to inject some mechanical flavor into this variant. Thanks to the addition of claws, the two villains hop around on the iconic mouse fireworks of the original game and evade the player's strikes until they eliminate Claws' options for escaping. This is exactly how the fight operates in Knights, but it's also the exact change that the Deadly Six fights needed. If you remember from my review, I proposed that giving the Deadly Six more movement tools would help prevent the player from spamming homing attacks and ending the fights too quickly. This inspiration from the source material genuinely delivers on the solution I asked for, changing this phase into a rhythmic exercise of timing attacks in motion for maximum performance. Jackal aids Zor in bolstering the iconography and audio design of what was already one of the better fights in Lost World proper. Just a note, in Silent Force Zone 2, the player can't reflect the projectiles back at Zor unless they kick, but in the Jackal version, the player can either kick or homing attack the cards, and it makes no difference. I always thought that was an interesting change. The final encounter with Zavok is fittingly framed as the encounter with Gilwing from Knights, a perfect stand-in for his dragon. It suffers from the same lock-on barrage that the Sky Road fight has, but again, the HD model of Gilwing is such a treat to see. After the Zeddy are defeated, color and life is returned to the overworld with the harmonious soundtrack of Knight's Journey of Dreams. A subtle touch to the presentation, but Riala actually swaps places with Knights, as Sonic and Knights fly through the sky together. Peak fan service, what can I say? Sonic frees the Nightopians, and that marks the end of this brisk yet engaging level. A Nightmare Zone is an experience clearly better than the sum of its parts. The boss rush suffers from similar flaws already discussed in my Lost World review, thanks to the core of the Zeddy fights being unchanged. But some examples clearly benefited from the expanded design. I still wish they incorporated more mechanics from the original Knights boss fights, but the examples seen here are certainly good. While creating a Knights-inspired flight minigame for Crimson Eagle would have been fine, using Knights' iconic boss fights in a new boss rush mode was still a brilliant idea. This adds additional value to the original Zeddy encounters by allowing the player to tackle most of them in a single level, easily the most enjoyable format for them. The artistry behind the environments and tributes to Knights are of genuineness and frame the experience as a love letter to the original series while proving itself as a meaningful contribution to what Lost World promised to deliver. Unfortunately, however, it all rings a little basic. I really don't have much to add, but as we discussed at the beginning, the core appeal of Lost World's DLC suite comes from its two Nintendo crossover projects. This in-house celebration of Sonic Team's past is a nice appetizer, but if the Nightmare Zone was released as the only form of DLC content, I'd say the post-launch content for Lost World wouldn't be anything particularly novel. Thankfully, Sega chose to embrace their special opportunity, surprising players with the first Nintendo crossover level for Lost World. It's not a generic Mario level. I'm just gonna say it. They chose something much better. This is Yoshi's Island Zone, a love letter to the Yoshi franchises in the form of a 2D platforming level that merges the mechanics and collection aspects of the original SNES title with Lost World's core design. Immediately, the aesthetics delight, with a colorful presentation that melds a cheerful, handcrafted motif with the nice shadow work found within Lost World's lighting system. It's these shadows on the trees and interior set pieces that really bring out the style of Yoshi's Island, or rather, Yoshi's story. The aesthetic of this zone definitely calling back to the textures and stylistic choices of Yoshi's story more than the SNES original, but I don't mind the melding of these at all. If anything, this is an inspired choice for Lost World to play around with, now in high definition. The placement of shadows throughout helps contrast the foreground environment with a mostly stoic background, one consisting of clouds and a sun made of fabric, with the sky following suit. Later on, layers of waves move in the background, which help provide a sense of evolution as Sonic progresses onward. It's amazing how the artists capture the essence of Yoshi's early adventures so well, but still went the extra mile to make sure the long-praised designs for grass and skies benefited from modern overhauls. I haven't even mentioned the greenery, which is so eloquently balanced in flavor thanks to the variance of shading and color on each patch. Before the release of Yoshi's Woolly World, this was easily the most visually impressive display of the Yoshi series aesthetic. The music deserves special mention here. While Nightmare Zone opted to reuse already excellent themes from Journey of Dreams, players can enjoy a creative arrangement of Flower Garden from Yoshi's Island. There's a clear aim to hold on to the relaxed vibe of the original, but the instrumental decisions help bolster the whimsical feel that was already beneath the surface of the original. The E-piano and saxophone blare with such confidence, while Lost World's trademark piano accompaniment keeps the piece moving. I absolutely adore the jazz flute when it contributes short responses here and there to the melody. I just wish there was more of it. The beat track isn't overbearing here, very reminiscent of its utility in Snowball Waltz. It's clear that every component is strong on its own, but when the piece comes together, it's a fittingly funky and confident version of the iconic level theme. It's exactly what you'd expect if you Lost Worldified the original, so you won't hear any complaints from me. The true appeal I find with Yoshi's Island Zone is its gameplay loop, but it all begins with the level design. As mentioned before, it's a stage entirely played in 2D, which means we can directly compare many factors of the gameplay experience to the original Yoshi's Island. Lost World's controls work well in this environment, with occasional opportunities for fancy maneuvers covered in my review, but the level is generally designed to focus on basic movement for the sake of authenticity. I actually rather like this, and this approach to level design helps soften one of the only complaints I have with Yoshi's Island Zone: the camera. The level can feel rather claustrophobic at points, and this can occasionally cause a player's mistake if they move too quickly. Generally, spin dashing will result in taking a hit. The level design and enemy placement creates a path that is simply too narrow for speedrunning. Yet, this helps contribute to the relaxed nature of the level and feels more in line with the source material. Lost World's interpretation lacks the natural flow of the terrain found in most of Yoshi's Island, but the zone features uses of warp pipes, platforms rotating on an axis, and exploration involving multiple tiers of verticality. These are core tenets of Yoshi Island's level design, and these aspects faithfully recreate the feel of playing through one of those original levels. Once again, the terrain being rather flat compared to its inspiration is a bit of a knock against Lost World's version, but I think the level gimmicks taken from Yoshi are put to good use for sure. It's these various set pieces that house the many collectibles found in the zone. Dispensers filled with Yoshi eggs make an appearance, and faithfully recreate the feel of collecting them from the original title. In Yoshi's Island, the player has the ability to collect eggs from these while also creating eggs by swallowing enemies. The most interesting application for the eggs was the ability to throw them at enemies and special targets, which contributed largely to the exploration and puzzle solving found within various levels. In Lost World, the player does not have the ability to use these eggs for anything during the level, though a great reward is provided at the end, which scales for each Yoshi egg brought to the goal. In short, the player can earn many lives by hatching these eggs at the end of the goal. So, what's the challenge? The punishment for getting hit is that you lose all of the Yoshi eggs Sonic is currently carrying. All of them. and you cannot get more from containers you've already tapped. This is where the collection aspects of the original Yoshi's Island return, though in a much harsher manner. Shy Guys will occupy the lands, but they don't pose much of a substantial threat. However, the piranha plants certainly will. They will grow out from their placements, which can definitely catch speedy players by surprise, and it only takes one mistake to compromise your entire expedition to boost your live counter. My emphasis on the harshness of this gameplay loop may sound critical, but I actually praise these choices. Taking one's time to navigate the level feels authentic to Yoshi's Island, and there are no expectations that the player is going to reach the goal with anything. It may just be a bit sad. An experienced player will be very familiar with the kick ability, and this is well utilized in the zone thanks to the enemy placement. Shy Guys are often placed near piranha plants that are difficult to reach, yet block progression of certain routes. Kicking the Shy Guys into them clears the path ahead, and I never get tired of doing this. That all sounds well and good, IKG, but Yoshi's Island was known for having many collectibles, not just one. Yes, indeed. And thankfully, the red star rings have been given a special flower makeover, and they are well placed throughout. Occasionally, the player may have to explore hidden warp pipe rooms in order to find them, which feels rewarding. Adding the features of this level together, we have 5 hidden collectibles, multiple paths, hidden areas, enemies placed to be exploited as projectiles, and a challenging objective centered around not taking damage. It all looks so simple, and it is, but this combination of mechanics makes Yoshi's Island Zone an endlessly rewarding experience. And yes, bringing every Yoshi egg to the end is easily the most satisfying reward. Yoshi's Island Zone is the most polished and well-conceived of the 3 DLC levels for Lost World, and I don't say this lightly. This is as close to perfect as it could be. I'm not the greatest fan of the Yoshi titles for various reasons, but I simply couldn't ask for a more appropriately and expertly crafted fusion of the 2 series. It's not just the blend of inclusions that make for an interesting gameplay loop, it's also the restraint that I respect so much. They didn't incorporate a hokey egg-throwing mechanic, they didn't use wisps to create Yoshi-like transformations, nor did they attempt to bring Baby Mario into the fray. They didn't overthink it. Sometimes it's the simplicity of a clever collaboration that does all of the work. As long as the experience is polished and brings out intrinsic motivation from players like myself, then the project can be easily written off as a success. It's also effortless. Maybe some of you think I'm overstepping and I'm getting way too excited about a 2D level in a modern Sonic game, but I stand by the analysis written up to this point. Yoshi's Island Zone is excellent, and it takes this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the series much further than the appetizer found within Nightmare Zone. Maybe it's about time I gave that SNES classic another try. The Legend of Zelda Zone is a creative amalgamation of elements throughout Nintendo's flagship series, a love letter to the Zelda series in whole. It features exploration at its core. This is the biggest event of the DLC for Lost World, and it does not disappoint. Upon selecting the level, it's the music that hits you over the head. This is a thumping, Hyrule Warriors-esque arrangement of the main theme of Zelda, and it carries the pathos of the series completely in the Sonic crossover event. The snare drum and cymbals are clashing away throughout the whole arrangement, never letting the player lose a sense of adrenaline. The bass and strings soar with the iconic melody, while the woodwinds accentuate the melody. In all truth, this is a rather straightforward arrangement, but it absolutely succeeds at what it needs to, and wholly so. Allow me to indulge in the artistic design of The Legend of Zelda Zone. The art style is reminiscent of Ocarina of Time 3D, which is appropriate given the renewed popularity of the original title in the early 2010s. It's safe to say that the developers nailed the transition to Lost World's aesthetics, and Sonic doesn't seem as out of place as you might expect. Perhaps we can thank the charming addition of Link's green tunic and hat, which only makes the crossover more appealing for fans of both series. I have to give special mention to the brown gloves and boots, which really round out the look. The land of Hyrule is portrayed with vivid colors and granted a passionate, if shrunken, perspective of Hyrule Field from Ocarina of Time. It feels great to take it all in, and looking upon the horizon, you can see Hyrule Castle in all of its glory. Lake Hylia is featured in the overworld, and the Cuckoos and Deku carefully recreated in high definition. Even the iconic Sheikah Stones and their secret interactions make an appearance here. Just as Link could launch Sheikah Stones into the sky with the explosion of a bomb, Sonic can do the very same with the Bomb Wisp. Discovering this for the first time was unreal. In the second half, the player traverses a cave structure through the use of Lost World's inner tube design. Though one can easily align this experience to that of a Zelda dungeon, as a brilliant rendition of a dungeon theme from A Link to the Past is beautifully integrated. The trumpet solo, performed by Mitsuharu Fukuyama, carries the iconic melody with incredible vibrato that punctuates each phrase excellently. As a cellist myself, I have to pay special attention to the two that accompany here. The main harmony is smooth and legato, while the secondary cello accompaniment is rugged and matches the right-hand piano's driving force. It all sounds rather sinister, befitting of the material it is representing. However, with the driving piano so iconic to Lost World, it never loses its sense of fun either. The perfect balance of tonality for what The Legend of Zelda Zone aims to achieve. Despite the commitment to celebrating Ocarina of Time as the representation of the Zelda IP, the Hero of the Sky and Crimson Loftwing make cameo appearances based on actions chosen by the player. With Skyward Sword represented here on top of visuals based in Ocarina of Time, this presents an interesting dichotomy for what Zelda Zone could have looked like if Sega and Nintendo decided to tribute the latest blockbuster entry in the series at the time. And for that, I think it's worth a brief comparison. Skyward Sword's visuals feature a soft pastel color that is reminiscent of watercoloring. Combined with its pointillism, the datification of assets, if you will, you have a very unique look for that title. The areas you visit have a very soft brushstroke effect that gives the atmosphere a comfortable and familiar feeling. Impressionism is present as well, with a consistent lightness and blending of colors across all environments. I could go on, but the key detail here is the commitment to every environment having a paint-like texture to it. Zelda Zone has a strong commitment to its Ocarina of Time 3D roots, but the presence of those characters as depicted by Skyward Sword creates an odd clash every time they appear. It just begs the thought of a Sonic level using the impressionistic effects seen in Skyward Sword. Imagine a Skyloft level. Ultimately, I would have liked to have seen Zelda Zone take on an art style reminiscent of Skyward Sword, but I also wouldn't be surprised if the resources were scarce in the creation of this DLC. These are simple, one-level crossovers at the end of the day, regardless of how well crafted they are. I thought this comparison would be worth noting since the game kinda invites it, but nonetheless, I do appreciate the visual design the level received. Speaking of design, the level itself reflects the split between overworld and dungeon with two completely different approaches to level design. This has an effect on messing with players and their ability to adjust to what Hyrule has to offer. You see, Sonic's handling in Lost World is not suited for flat, open terrain that has little sense of obstacles or interactions to be had, making the open section of Hyrule Field near the start the most awkward to navigate. This is where I have to be a little more critical and say that Yoshi's Island Zone nails the gameplay conversion between those series more successfully, but the commitment to recreating Ocarina of Time's sense of space is ultimately a fun sandbox for Lost World systems to play with. So I feel it's worth putting up with the awkward turning for that. Homing on the attacks of Deku Scrubs, interacting with the Cuckoos, and climbing up the cliff sides are a lot of fun, and doing this in any order you'd like is honestly worth the shakiness of the controls. Not to mention, the dungeon half of the experience is thoroughly enjoyable to navigate. The level design plays to the strengths of the inner tubular designs of Windy Hill Zone 3 to give you a great thrill of traversal. Multiple pathways are presented here, with some offering more rupees while others leading to secret areas with collectibles. You may even find yourself using bombs to uncover these areas like Link, or you can blow yourself up. I have to give credit to the devs for having Gorons roll towards you in place of the rocks from Windy Hill. It's just a visual change, but it's awfully charming. The collectibles grant Zelda Zone a lot more depth, in the same vein as the Yoshi eggs. The player can explore both the overworld and dungeon to find heart containers that increase Sonic's max health, a complete departure from the tried and true ring system. While I wouldn't say the level is challenging enough to warrant having this actually affect the player's chance of survival, it is a really nice touch. You are incentivized to explore the level to obtain more of these, and the act of finding and opening these chests is just perfect. It's perfect. This is my favorite of the soft collectibles between all of the DLC levels on offer. It just feels so satisfying to explore every nook and cranny of the stage, to find where these are, and end the level with a hefty amount of hearts displayed on your screen. The Legend of Zelda Zone is easily the most ambitious of the DLC levels, and it mostly succeeds in providing players with an inventive homage to the Zelda series. It pushes Lost World's mechanics and systems far enough to keep collectors and speedrunners engaged, while also representing the guest series with authenticity. It's not always the most comfortable experience moving around in the overworld, but the dungeon area ends the journey on a very solid note. I would have liked to have seen more risks here, such as an art style more representative of Skyward Sword, but I only placed such high demands because the developers did an honestly solid job with the final product. Out of all three of the guest franchises included in this suite of DLC, Zelda has easily the most passionate audience, so it was very important that this one was well considered. And they succeeded at creating the kind of experience fans of both series would like to have. One of the greatest strengths of Sonic Lost World is the gameplay complexity it hides underneath its straightforward appearance. This is something that I discussed extensively in my review. You can draw a straight line out from the base game to the DLC when it comes to this mentality. If you wanted to, you could easily blow through the entire Yoshi level in a minute, but you'd be missing the whole point. It does take some background knowledge on the boss fights of Nights into Dreams to really see what they're doing with these matchups, but it is there. These DLC levels live and die on how interested the player is, and I'm happy to say that this was very much an unprecedented bonus for Sonic fans at the time. They are linear, but they still encourage freedom of exploration of mechanics, just like the main game, taken further by borrowing gameplay integrations from Nintendo franchises. These were given out to players as free downloads, and that's also unprecedented for Sonic at the time. For cynical reasons, I can only assume this model was chosen because Sega was not doing well financially. Maybe there just wasn't enough demand on such a small platform, the Wii U, to create and promote paid DLC for Lost World. Maybe it's because the game didn't review all that well, and sold mediocre amounts of copies. Whatever the reason, it means something that Lost World's DLC marked the most recent time I felt truly confident in the Sonic series, speaking as a longtime fan. In the early 2010s, it felt like Sonic had really started to gain more positivity and goodwill from the industry. And even though Lost World wasn't nearly as successful as Colors or Generations, the fact that Nintendo was willing to partner with Sega and make these crossovers with their IPs says something about the revival Sonic was experiencing, even then. Of course, it's not my focus to explain how and why that all changed, but instead to highlight that these content updates prolonged a sense of confidence I had in the franchise for so long. That's not to say I'm not still passionate about Sonic. It's just, above all the super specific details I examined in this video, it's just nice to remember that we had this. It was nice.